Okay, I wanted to do a video on a court case I came across that I thought was relevant as to why pharmaceutical companies don't seek out cures, rather they seek out treatments. Now, everything I'm going to say is just my opinion. Consult your doctor for health advice, consult a lawyer for legal advice. I'm an expert in neither. That being said, I thought this court case was really interesting. I've got it pulled up here, and it's from 1919. It's called Dodge versus Ford Motor Company. Now, this is a really interesting court case because I think a lot of people, when they deal with chronic illnesses and trying to find cures, they realize quickly that curing an illness is not as profitable as treating it. It's easier for someone to go to a store and, they want continued purchases. They don't want one purchase, they want infinity purchases. That's how business works. But I don't think people understand how it got this way and, where this idea came from or why pharmaceutical companies fund certain research and not other research. So I came across this court case kind of by happenstance. I knew about it just because I really like old cars and stuff like that. So Dodge versus Ford Motor Company, essentially, again, I'm not a legal scholar. So my understanding of this court case is that the Dodge brothers were investors in Ford Motor Company. And what Henry Ford was trying to do at the time was he wanted to pay his workers enough so that they could afford to buy the cars they were producing. And I think a lot of really interesting stuff came out of Ford Motor Company insofar as before Ford, I think he pioneered the 8-hour workday, which I think a lot of people might say is still too much, but he pioneered that. Before that, that wasn't really a thing. I could be wrong about this, but I think he was the one that started standardizing a 5-day work week, which again, maybe people think is still too much. But I think it's interesting, and I don't think he gets very much credit for standardizing working hours. Again, you have to remember what it was like before that to understand what it is that he did. So he wanted to pay his workers well enough that they could afford to buy the cars that he was producing. His mindset was, he wants as many customers as possible. It opened up small towns to a lot more business opportunities. The freedom that an automobile provides is something that I think a lot of people don't appreciate. But anyways, getting back to the court case, he wanted to pay his workers well. The Dodge brothers had their own company, but they were also investors in Ford. They were concerned that if he was going to be paying his workers better, that the stocks would not be paying out quite as much. Now, what the courts found when the Dodge brothers decided to sue Henry Ford, Ford Motor Company, what they found was that because it was a publicly traded company, he had to operate that company in the shareholders' best interests. Not the employees, not the owner, but the shareholders. The reason for this, in my opinion, is that if you have a publicly traded company, a company with investors, and you're not putting those investors' priorities first, their profits, the company could be a Ponzi scheme. The gist of what a Ponzi scheme is you come up with an idea, a company, or a product. You find a bunch of investors, get them to invest in it, and you start paying them out initially with really good returns, so that way you get even more investment, and then you steal it. You just leave, you change your name, whatever, right? Or the investors start calling their money back in, and you run out of money. So the scheme falls apart. So with a publicly traded company, in the same way you have investors, and you're legally beholden, and this court case shows that precedent of you have to be putting the shareholders' interests first. So for something like what he was trying to do, Henry Ford, he had a longer view of the way he was going to run his company in terms of profits. he was going to make the company more profitable in the long term, while in the short term, using that money for employee compensation, most likely worker retention, skills, skill building, that kind of thing, keeping the workers happy, keeping the company running smoothly. Now, the Dodge brothers, for whatever reason, did not like that they weren't having their interests put first. And keep in mind, they were competitors too. So maybe they didn't want to have to start paying their workers as much. That could be part of it. But anyways, the courts upheld shareholder primacy, meaning the shareholders are who you are beholden to as a company. And the reason that this court case applies to finding cures is because if you're a pharmaceutical company, you're a publicly traded company. So you are legally beholden to make as much money for your shareholders as possible. So whoever owns your shares is your boss, essentially. And if you're not making them money, you're committing a criminal act, essentially. Again, I'm not a legal scholar, but it's interesting to know that that is the mechanism as to why pharmaceutical companies would seek out, through funding, studies on treatments rather than funding cures. Because you want a customer for life. You don't want to just give them one treatment. If you can sell, one versus 1,000 of something, you'd rather sell 1,000 of something. Or in this case, infinity of something, right? For example, epilepsy, the first line treatment is medication, and you don't always get off those treatments. You're on those treatments for life, and that's quite the thing. So pharmaceutical companies, they are legally, because of this, not allowed to search for cures. So anyone looking at neurological, autoimmune diseases, you're not going to find those cures coming from pharmaceutical companies. Their research is interesting and it's worth reading about, but oftentimes you'll find their studies focus more on treatment. So maybe they'll find that in epilepsy there's low magnesium, which there are studies that show that. Now, does that mean low magnesium causes epilepsy? Or is there something upstream of that, like gut dysbiosis, that inhibits proper mineral and vitamin absorption in the gut, right? So they're not going to look at the root cause. They're going to be looking at, well, maybe we can sell a specific chemical composition that mimics what the body's lacking. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily how it works, but as an example. So it's something that I wish more people knew about, because I think a lot of people know that, they'd rather treat you than cure you, but they don't understand the precedent for it. This is that precedent, Dodge versus Ford Motor Company. And publicly traded companies. I don't think we'll see any cures come out of publicly traded companies for this specific reason. So for anyone struggling with these conditions and inclined to do research, I think this is good information to have. This video could be a lot longer, but I'm going to try and keep it as focused as possible. But that's why a lot of my research focuses on case studies. For example, with cancer, you'll hear about accounts where someone had cancer, even stage 4, terminal cancer, and they have, wish I could remember the term for it, a spontaneous cure. They go to the doctor one day and the cancer's just gone. Wasn't because of the treatments they were doing, it's just magically gone. Now, that could be because something they did metabolically upstream of their cancer, right? So maybe they're now getting a vitamin that they didn't have previously, something in their immune system changed, maybe it's environmental, maybe it's internal and biological, maybe their immune system kicked on at a certain point. But in those cases of cancer where you see spontaneous recovery, I think is the term, where you see that, there would just be so many questions to ask. That would be really interesting. there's a lot of speculation with things like cancer that it could be bacterial, it could be fungal, it could be parasitic, and there are some drugs that treat those three categories that I've seen people speculate could be potentially worth looking at. I'll make videos on those at a later date, but I think anyone who understands what I'm talking about knows what I'm referencing there. But that's about all I have for this. Dodge versus Ford Motor Company is the precedent that pharmaceutical companies are obligated to treat rather than cure. That's the gist of the video, and thank you.